Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Hey, Omateotl. Greetings, everyone, to the Healing Generations podcast. My name is Maestro Jerry Tello, and really glad that you joined us today, wherever you're listening from, whenever you're listening. It's a blessing to have you. Thank you for bringing your energy, your essence, a sense of who you are to listen to these words and these sharings and these teachings this way. And when you join us that way, then we build a community. And I really wish that we could be in the same place and be in a circle. So I'm going to imagine that today, that we're in a circle, just sharing that way, and, so that we can really bring the energy of our connectedness together. And as we do always, I want to begin by thanking the Creator and the ancestors, all of our ancestors, all those people that have come before us, the lineage of our heritage, the lineage of our teachings, the lineage of our blessings, and the lineage of the experience of the struggles as well. And just acknowledge that and give thanks for all of those people and all those experiences that have come before us. And I invite you to do the same thing. And as we sit here at the end of this calendar year and getting ready for this new calendar year here, it really is a time really of reflection and of acknowledgement, first of all. We're now in the winter solstice, which means a time of going inside, a time of reflection, a time of reaffirmation, but also a time of planning and assessing as well. So as we think about our ancestors, let's give thanks for all that they have provided. I invite you to think about individual ancestors and those that have shown up for you, or that have been part of your life, or been instrumental in your life to bring you this far. And as we do that, we also then acknowledge all our relations, all the relations in our lives, especially that of, our Mother Tierra, Mother Earth, grandfather, son, the beautiful wind spirit, the beautiful feminine ocean and water spirit, the grandmother moon, and then all those animal spirits, the creepy crawlers, the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged, all those, beautiful entities in our lives. And some of us even have them as part of our families, those fur babies that accompany our family and become an instrumental part. We want to bring them in. And as I invite you to take a deep breath, hold it just for the count of 4 and release. We acknowledge the land that we're on. Where are you at right now? And plant your feet on the ground if you can. I'm on Tongva Gabrielin land, and we acknowledge our relatives there. Just make a commitment to them that not only acknowledge the land, but take care of that land, and advocate, for the connection of that land back to the original people that way. But as long as we're here, let us take care of it and be good representatives of that land too. And as you continue to breathe, we acknowledge our communities, the barrios, the neighborhoods that we associate with, work in, are part of. Think about those people that support you, where you go buy groceries at, or the people where you go eat, or the people that fix your cars, or people that take care of you, the health providers, the mental health providers, all those people around you that really support you and us in so many, many ways. Let's bring them into this circle, because essential part of our lives as well. And then we think about our own families, our families, our blood-related families and our love-related families. Let's bring them to mind, and especially those that maybe struggling a little bit, maybe having a little difficult time, whether it be physically, with their health, or emotionally, with their feelings, or mentally, with balancing out those mental health issues, or even spiritually, not grounded, lost maybe in some ways. Let's bring them all to mind that way, our family, blood-related and love-related too, because some are just become part of our lives based on our relationships with them, And so we really want to acknowledge, all those family members that way, and And as we do that, then we think about ourselves. And as we complete this year and move on to next year, it really brings a mirror to us about our journey so far. What we've done, the walk we've traveled this year, the challenges that we have, the blessings that we have. And, one blessing is that we're here. We want to acknowledge that those relatives that have passed on, that are no longer here with us in the physical realm, let's keep them to mind and even, mention their names if you would, because they are still part of our whole essence of our spiritualness. And we want to, those of you that are grieving, that are going through a process of grieving that will, sometimes take years and go on the rest of our lives. I know, my dad passed when I was 13. I still miss him sometimes, feel those feelings again, those good memories, those happy memories, but also those sad memories. My mom, who transitioned a number of years ago, is with me, a lot of times, especially as we're making those tamales, man, remember all those times gathering with her and her instruction on how to make them and how we do them. And, we invited her to help us, and I think she did because they came out pretty good, But let's just bring to mind all those relatives that have passed, that have crossed over that way. And as we, complete this circle of acknowledgement, let's acknowledge all the people of all races, of all ways, of all identities, all across the world. And especially, those that are struggling, those that need food, they need health, they need support, they need love, they need healing. Let's bring them to mind, right now as we're sitting here. As we begin this contemplation, this reflection of 2025 as we move into 2026. And so we say all of that in the name of, all our relations, O Meteor Palabra Ashe, as we begin this final plática, if you will, for 2025 on the Healing Generations podcast. And, what I would like to offer right now is just some reflections of, the movimiento, the movement. One thing that's real important that I've learned is movement. Got to keep moving. I had a tío that I went to visit in San Antonio one time, and he was already like 92 years of age. And he looked pretty good, he looked pretty good and pretty aware of things. And I went to visit him and I said, "So tío, how do you do it? How do you, what's the secret of you being 92 and still, pretty alert and vibrant?" He says, "Well, mijo," he says, "you got to keep moving. Got to keep moving. Every day, got to get up and do something, do something good, do something to help, do something active. You can't sit still. You got to do something, And, and as I thought about that, that sense of movimiento, that sense of movement has always been an essential element of people learning, of people growing, of things changing. We had the civil rights movement, had the Chicano movement. We had, all kinds of movements that have gone on that really have changed the trajectory of how people live and how people do that, a sense of movimiento. And, at the same time, I'm reminded that movimiento or movement is different than motion because, I'm sure for yourself, but I know for myself, I found myself in motion a lot. I'm doing a lot of things, doing for others. I'm taking care of a lot of things, but I ain't going no place, I'm just kind of, treading water. I'm just trying to keep my head above water, but I'm doing it the same way. And I'm repeating patterns. And so this aspect of movimiento, we can go from one year to the next, but if we keep doing these things the same way, with the same attitude, with the same feelings, with the same perception, are we really moving? Or are we just in motion? And I'd like to, to challenge you to think about the movimiento in your life, the movement of your spirit, the movement of your heart, of your mind, of your thoughts, and physically even moving. I mean, and that's a real vital thing as well. I know I really want to make a commitment. I'm going to say it right here on this podcast to be more in movement physically. I need to be, more, stretching and moving and get my body, in an active way, walking, all of those things, And so I want to offer 4 teachings here, 4 steps to keep us in movement, but not just in motion, but movement, in sacred movement. In the Nahuatl language, the word encloque nahuaque, comes to mind, which is the interconnected sacredness. So when we talk about, Incloque the movement of Incloque, we talk about interconnected sacred movement. And so I want to invite you to consider that concept, to consider that thought, to consider that teaching, the interconnected sacred movement, which means that, we are in balance with our gifts and our baggage, because the reality is that, you can do as much work as you want, go to as much ceremony you want, go to as much therapy you want, mindful meditate, everything else. But there's always going to be challenges in your life. And there's always going to be, issues that we will face. And, the reality is that all of us carry these issues as well. If we aren't paying attention, they can take over our lives. The baggage, the hurt, the trauma, the past trauma can come to bear again. So it's this sense of, sacred movement really is balancing, those cargas, those challenges, the barriers, the traumas with the blessings, with the wisdom, with all of those things that they can really help us stay in harmony and stay in this sense of sacred movement. And so I want to offer you, these 4 steps, if you will. And the first aspect of inner sacred movement is showing up. We got to show up every day and being present. How is it that you can show up in a good way, in a sacred way every day? How is it that you can, in your work that you do, or in your relations, or in the things that you do in your life, how can you show up completely, wholly, in a sacred way? And I know, you've heard me speak, many of you have heard me speak many, many times, and I always talk about my abuelita, my grandma who began her day in prayer. Sometimes early, 4:30 in the morning, she began her day in prayer. She would kneel down and, in front of her sacreds, the Virgen Guadalupe and the candles and all of that. And she began her day that way. She would start by giving thanks, and then start by focusing her day, and praying for everyone that was connected to her, which, when you do that, it means that you're, if you will, that interconnectedness, then you're not alone. Your movement, your walk, your behavior, if you will, is really interconnected. You recognize that anything you do is going to impact all those people in your lives. And it seems like a heavy burden, but the reality is it does. There's friends and relatives that I have that, they do something or they've done something, whatever way they've done it, it impacts me. I may have not talked to them for a long time, but, because we're interconnected that way, when a blessing happens to them, when a wonderful thing happens to them, man, I get happy, but also when they're hurting, it impacts me as well. So just beginning the day, how do you begin your day? How do you begin your preparation to show up, to be present in your life every day, so that you can be present in every relationship that you have? My grandma would start with those prayers and start with those, light a little medicine sometimes, light a candle. What is your ritual? What is your tradition? And maybe you haven't been as consistent as you want to be, but maybe you want to consider, what is it, a tradition that you can begin that helps you to be present, helps you to show up, helps you to begin your day in a good way. And, someone say, well, I don't got time. Well, time is what you make of it. And so are you willing to make time? And I would say 5 minutes in the morning, and if you're not willing to spend 5 minutes in the morning, to really ground yourself and connect with the sacredness, connect with the traditions, then maybe, you're not willing to take this journey in a sacred way. Maybe what you'll find is that you'll be reacting to life rather than, responding and being in connection with life. So I really want to challenge you for you to think about what is it that you need in order to be present. And part of that is being present is also acknowledging those things in your life. My grandma began by giving thanks, but she would go in the garden and even greet the plants. She would greet the flowers and good morning, buenos días, ¿cómo estás? But she would greet everybody, How do you greet the day? How do you greet those elements in your life? How do you greet the relatives that are there with you? And even when you go to work or wherever you're at, do you greet? I just came from the store right now, and it's interesting as you're walking down the aisle, you see people, and some of them have their head down, and some don't even look at you. But I've made a point of greeting. Good morning. How you doing? Good to see you. That sense of greeting, interconnectedness that way, And so what does it mean for you to be present? What does it mean for you to show up? And we carry these different roles, not only as a person, but some of us carry the role as a parent. Some of us carry the role as an abuelito, grandparent. Some of us are a son or a daughter. Some of us are compañeros. Some of us are husbands, wives. We got partners. We're children. How do you play that role? How do you show up in that role in a good way? And I know that it made a big difference how my parents showed up for me. And sometimes, it wasn't their fault. It was me because, I've got to get up to go to school, and, I sleep late and I'm late, and my mom's coming in, yeah, levántase, come on, you get up here late, So I'm hurrying and jumping up and getting up, and that doesn't start your day in a good way. So how is it that you can help, those people in your lives in terms of greeting them, of acknowledging them, of being present in their life, and that sense of showing up and being present in your sacredness. And sometimes when we're not in a good place, sometimes when we're hurting, sometimes when, things are going on in our lives, we can't be present in a good way. And what I want to offer you is to acknowledge that, just to, be able to share with whoever you're interacting. And I'm not having a good day, I'm struggling a little bit, or got a little headache, or, I'm a little sad. I was just talking to one of my camaradas, and he was, sharing with me that, he's thinking about, his mom who had passed a couple of years ago around this time of the year. So he was sad that way. But it was beautiful that he acknowledged. I got to talk about, my dad and how I feel about him even so many years later. My mom, and we had this conversation about those people that have passed in our lives. But it came about because he acknowledged. So I asked him, how you doing, right? I'm doing okay. I said, you sure? Well, to be honest, I'm a little sad right now because this is about time of the year my mother crossed over, and so we had a conversation about that. And so I want to invite you, we don't always have to be happy. You don't have to be joyful, when it's appropriate, to be able to share with people where you're at, what you're going through, having a good day, not having a good day, struggling with something, so that you can show up fully, so that you can be present, And often when we play these multiple roles, even as a dad, I wasn't always in a good space. I'd be dealing with work and driving home. I'm thinking about all the things, or people that upset me, or projects I have to work on, or worried about certain things, or worried about finances. And then, I show up at the house, and, my kids are, waiting for me. They're waiting. My little boy, at that time, his father, I remember when my kids were little, Emilio would show up, Daddy, come on, let's go play. And I'm thinking, man, I'm tired. I've been working all day. He wants to play, But how does it that I show up for him in a good way? How do you show up for your children? How do you show up for your relations, And it takes work. And there are going to be times when you're not going to be able to show up in a good way. And all I'm inviting you to do is to acknowledge that, I'm not in a good place right now. Give me a few minutes. And, sometimes we come home and, our relations, our kids, or our partners want us to talk or want us to do something. We're not in a good place. So I'm saying, give me about 5 minutes. Let me settle down for a little bit. Let me drink some water, or, have some coffee or something. So, but whatever it takes for you to begin showing up in a good way in your life, in your relations, in your work, I want to just challenge you to begin working on that. What do you need in order to be able to show up in a good way? What do you need in order for you to be present in your relationships, in a good way? Right now, I realize that for many of us, not just acknowledged for me, it's been a tough year. It's been a hard year, because of all the things that are going on, politically and socioeconomically and all kinds of other ways. So it's been tough. And I find myself getting upset, being frustrated, regardless of how you find yourself on that political spectrum. It hurts me that I witnessed it, where you see your relatives or people or neighbors being mistreated for their legal status, or being mistreated for just who they are, and or I see it on the news, and it just, God, it bothers me so much and infuriates me. And, and so we've gone through a year of so many changes and so many things going on. And how is it that we can deal with that? We can give space for that as well, to be able to share. And anger is not bad, if you're feeling angry about something, acknowledge it, but what do you do with it? What's important is that we don't allow the anger and those feelings, those hurtful, negative, harsh feelings impact our relationships or our health. So how is it that you deal with your anger? How is it? What do you do? And many of us have traditions and rituals and different ways in which you do it. Some of you may meditate. Others of us may, have our prayer ways. You may light some sage and fan off, or, prayer, whatever that is, And let's think about how you can incorporate those things in your lives. And even, when I would come home and have my children, I would stop in the driveway and take a few minutes and just say a prayer and take some deep breaths and let go. Before I entered my house, because I knew if not, then I was going to enter in a contaminated way. So that's that first step, show up and be present in the best way that you can, in the best sacred way that you can, right? And then the next element after you show up is pay attention, right? That sense of paying attention of wherever you're at in the space that you're at. And throughout the day, you'll notice the sense of needing to pay attention. Because if we don't pay attention, then we can't respond to the needs of the situation. Sometimes we are reacting to situations, but that sense of paying attention is very, very important in all of our relations. Sometimes I come with my own agendas, my own issues, and I want to share those or want to be in those, and don't even realize that my compañera needs something different. Paying attention sometimes, means that I will interact with her and she's upset about something or has gone through something and she wants to share with me, right? And if I'm not clear about me paying attention, I can react. And I've done this. I've reacted, or she's in between sentences and I'm already wanting to give her advice or try and fix things. But that's because I'm not paying attention. I'm not paying attention to what she needs. And often she'll have to remind me, can you just listen to me? And I want to offer that sense of silence and listening as a sacred process, as a sacred tradition, as a sacred movement. The sense of being silent, quieting your mind, quieting your heart, quieting your spirit, and listening. And not only listening to the words, but listening to the feelings, listening to the vibration, listening to the spirit, paying attention to what someone is going through, to where they're at, to what they're feeling, to what they're struggling through, or what they're joyful for, right? And again, back to my compañera, I've had to practice that, of silencing myself, of paying attention, really being present, and then paying attention to what is it that she needs, or what do my kids need, or if I'm at work, And, I've traveled this road and many people see me as maestro and I'm an elder, and it's very easy for me to want to give advice. It's very easy for me to interject but it's not always necessary. It's not always the most appropriate thing to do. Because when I do that, it takes space. It may interrupt, a whole journey that someone or a group is going through and them finding the answers. And sometimes, even though we may have the answers, we may have an answer, it may not be what is necessary, what is the best thing. Sometimes our quietness and our holding of space is what is necessary, is what is valuable, is what is helpful at that time. And so paying attention to the situation, paying attention to the persons, paying attention to the surroundings are very, very important in this life right now, right? And I've noticed that, this is not a new phenomenon. I remember as a kid, I had to pay attention, especially in growing up in Compton, in the barrio. I had to pay attention walking down the street. And to pay attention to what's going on, where was safe, where was not safe to go. Should I walk over there? Should I go to this party? Should I interact with this person? Or, there's peligro, a little bit of danger over there. Let me go over here. Should I mention this thing right now when person's not in a good space? What do I need to do? Pay attention. Pay attention to what someone needs at a particular time. And if I'm really in tune, I can respond to what they need without them even asking, without them even knowing. And there's a whole different spiritual dimension of silence, of prayer, of paying attention that takes you to a different level. If you can create the space where there is silence so that you can hear the messages that's not coming from the person in front of you, but maybe even from your ancestors speaking something into you, from your intuitive self saying, maybe you should say this, or maybe you shouldn't say this, or maybe this is what the person needs, or maybe you get a feeling, and that feeling is more than just an emotional feeling. That feeling is an intuitive spiritual feeling, like, wait a minute, something is deeper going on here. When you create space for paying attention, for that breath, for that silence, a whole different dimension of sacred interconnection then happens. And so I want to invite you to explore that this year, to explore more time of silence, more time of being in space where you're listening, where you're paying attention, where you're watching, where you're observing, where you're feeling at a spiritual level, and then being present in that sense with your relationships with yourself, with your partner, with your spouse, with your children, with your coworkers, but even in your work. If you work as a helper, if you work as a therapist, if you work as a advocate, it's not always necessary for you to be the one that shares or says things, or especially those of us that are a little bit older, maybe we need to create more space for the young people. But I want to challenge the younger people too. You don't always have to say something. You don't always have to be in front. You don't always have to, be the voice. And maybe even if something is, if you will, out of pocket, not fair, pay attention whether it's the best thing to mention it right there. When I was younger, I was so into social justice and the sense of civil rights and all of that. I grew up during the time of the Chicano movement, the civil rights movement. That was very much a part of who I was. And every place I would go where I see injustice, I'd speak up about it at meetings, at gatherings. I'd talk about it. I speak loud. I was pretty articulate. And so I'd go to these community meetings or these meetings with cities or organizations, stuff like that, and I'd see some inequity, and right away I'd speak out about it. And one time, an older veterano, says, "Hey, brother," says, "Can I talk to you a little bit?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I appreciate you, being so vocal for our rights and doing everything." He says, "But, you went up there and spoke, straight up and exposed everything, said everything, and it shut down the meeting, man." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Yeah. People that were in charge just shut down. They stopped talking, because, you exposed so much that then, it might have been good, I thought, just to check it out and then give them more space. Let them reveal themselves more before you went up there and, gave all that information, And then he said something to me real deep. He says, "We appreciate your advocacy. We appreciate your love for our people. Appreciate your, you being so strong and be able to speak this way. But you know what? Have you noticed lately, sometimes the leaders don't invite you to meetings? The politicians, don't, because they already got your, he's called it a chaqueta. They already got your jacket, man. They know how you come in. So they're going to strategically move where your voice isn't heard. You got to switch it up, man. Know when to speak, know when not to speak. Know when to use anger, when to use love. Know when to use compassion, and know when to be quiet, And I wanted to challenge him, but when I began thinking about it, the brother was right. And he gave me a good consejo there, a good counsel that, when you pay attention, then you can determine what do you need to add, what is going to be helpful. Because really in life, we want to be helpful in our relationships, in our families, in our communities, in our political realm, in our work realm, and everything we do, we should be helpful. We should be adding. Our comments, our presence should be an addition, a positive addition. And some of us, get so focused at, speaking truth and advocating and calling out injustice that it really doesn't create movement. It creates stagnation. It creates, conflict. And I'm not saying conflict is bad. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you got to expose things. But it's important to pay attention to know when and how. So I want to offer that, as that second teaching, after you show up and present. Now let's pay attention to how we bring ourselves to a situation, what we offer, what we share, how we share it. And that good way to have us pay attention to our relations, pay attention to what is necessary, pay attention to what's going to be helpful, and pay attention to what our role is in our walk in life, And it might be good just to reflect, the last year on what are those things that maybe you could have done. As my little grandson, Leila says, Tata, you do a little bit better next time. When I play and I don't play correctly, he said, next time you do a little better, Well, let's reflect on this last year and where we could have done a little better and how we can, think about, how our role and our interaction can maybe be a little bit better that aligns us with that sacredness, And that then brings me to that third step or the third element of interconnected sacred movement. And that is do it with compassion, do it with love. That sense of yolotl, that sense of heart, that sense of love, of compassion, of cariño, the sense of nurturance. How can we approach life with love? That sense of creation. How can we recreate, transform situations or water the situations in our lives that can bring about love, that can bring about compassion, that can bring about that sense of compassion. And one of the most difficult elements of us being able to approach things with love is us embracing the harm and the trauma and the disconnect that has happened to us in our lives. Many of us in our own families, have grown up where, we haven't had good relations with our mom or our dad or brothers or sisters or tios or there's relations with other folks in our lives that we've worked with that have, produced, some conflictual situations, produced some trauma. I mentioned my dad, and my dad was a, wonderful man, real generous. But he had his issues, my dad had his issues. And as I mentioned, he talked loud, all the time. And kind of the ego was there. And especially when he drank, he'd get brusco, a little bit hard. And so we were the recipients of that. And, growing up and I saw him when he would drink, especially. And now I understand, his insecurities would come out when he was unable to fulfill what he thought was his expectations for him being a father, him being a man. Sometimes, the money wasn't there. Sometimes, he didn't have the facility to really give us what we needed or fulfill my mother's needs or our needs. And now I understand, because in me being a father, I experienced some of those same things, that when I feel insecure, when I don't feel appreciated, when I don't feel respected, or I've done some things of disrespect or of me not showing up or me not really fulfilling my role, that I get defensive too. And I see my dad in myself. And so I understand him now, but for many, many years I didn't, many, many years. And so in us showing up in relations, especially those relations where, we've had difficulty in, or we carry still the wounds of many, many years, of being angry for many years because of something that happened to us. The ability to really show up in our relations, to show up in our life, to show up in our work, to show up even for ourselves with compassion, it takes forgiveness. And that's a huge word. Forgiveness is a huge word, right? It's the burden of so many of us, that when the lesson now comes to us because of something that has happened, or something that someone has done to us or done to somebody else that has really, really hurt us or made us upset or violated us, and now that incident is gone. It's over. It's been gone. Sometimes many of us carry it for our whole lives. It becomes huge, and that sense of then how do we release our connectedness to that? How to release the perception of that? How to release the meaning of that we have grown and lived with and lived on, sometimes for many, many years. But energetically, and if you imagine your spirit being a circle, for some of us, that incident or that relationship with a particular person or thing that happened in our lives, maybe at one time occupied maybe 10% of our total tonality or our spiritual sense of who we are. But with time, for some of us, it's grown to 20, 30, 40, 50%. It's taken over the majority of our spirit, where we blame, if you will, those incidents and what has happened on how we are today. And not that it's not responsible for the wounds, it's not responsible for the disconnections, but how much power and how much energy do we give that, and how much do we feed that? So the element of forgiveness is disconnecting from the power that has on us. And as I mentioned, in the teachings, and especially in my book, Recovering Your Sacredness, I talk about the difference between looking back and living back. And looking back is looking at a situation, acknowledging it, acknowledging the part it's had in our life, but not living it like it's going on today. Not living it like it's happening to me right now. And so that aspect of forgiveness is really shifting our memory, our psychic, spiritual connection to that, and releasing. And it may take many breaths and many times, releasing the power that has over our lives. And that then maybe may open the door for us getting a better insight into our behaviors that sometimes mimic that, because I see the loud talking voice that I have that is like my dad's, and I see sometimes the harshness that and the ego that I carry sometimes that is like my dad's, but I can't blame him for that anymore. I have a choice in how I carry those things. So the third teaching and the third step, if you will, of sacred interconnected movement is leading with love and compassion, leading with a sense of forgiveness, leading with a sense of compassionate wholeness, and doing the work that we need in order to do that. And some of us, because of the woundedness, have picked up, if you will, coping mechanisms. Some of us drink, some of us get high, some of us get angry, some of us, work too hard and work too much, and some of us think everything out, and some of us rely on broken or harmful relationships, and some of us stay disconnected from people, or some of us become that relationship. And so what I'm offering to you is, in order to break those patterns and break those cycles, we all need help. We can't do it alone. And I want to just invite you, to seek counsel, whether it be from an elder or a therapist or someone that's close to you to help you through that. We can't do it alone. And some of us need some traditional practices, and whether you practice in a traditional indigenous way in your culture, sweat lodge or, teepee ceremony or prayer every day, or certain ritual, or danza can be that as well. movement, sacred movement can be that, meditation, going to a therapist, going to a healer, acupuncture, whatever that is. We must really, first of all, take the compassionate step of loving ourselves. And loving yourselves meaning to do the work that you need to do in order that you can feel that circle, that spiritual circle, with more love and more sacredness and more acceptance of who you are. So you like yourself. You can appreciate yourself, make time for yourself, realize that that's not selfishness, that's self-love. And when you love yourself, you're honoring your ancestors. You're honoring all the sacrifice that they've done over the years. How do we approach life? How do we approach our life and our situations and our work and our roles with a sense of compassion and love? And it's not easy, especially if we talk about the nitty-gritty day-to-day life. There's times, as a compañero or even as a dad, I'm thinking about, man, I was upset with my kids and I just want to yell at them or, get so upset. But fortunately, I have practice and teachings and teachers, and I've made promises, and sit in círculo with the círculo de hombres and seen what that harshness and that anger and that reactiveness does. And I don't want to be that. I don't want my kids to experience that in me. So I have had to pray and make a commitment to move with compassion, and if I'm not ready to do that, then I don't do it. I don't have that relationship. I don't go and talk with my kids until I'm ready to do that, And sometimes, I've had to say, well, let me think about it. I need to pray on this. I need, and I think, we've learned, me and my children have learned together how to do that with each other. So whatever work you need to do in order to be able to be in your relationships in a compassionate way, I invite you to do that. I invite you to seek somebody that you see that does that and ask them, how do you do that? How do you deal with these difficult situations that just upset the heck out of you? Just piss you off. Just, how do you still approach that with compassionate love? And even the work that we do, those of us that are advocates that are out there for social justice and all that, how do you approach your work with love, with a sense of compassion? You can be just as fervent. You can be just as adamant without doing it out of hate. Hate really is a weighted feeling that really contaminates everything. So even if you're advocating strong, you can be out there speaking loud, speaking your mind and speaking for our people. And sometimes it means, that if you're out in the street and you have to step up, for somebody to advocate for them, you do it in a loud way. You do it in if you will, a very strong, assertive way. And it may appear that you're angry because you hate something or hate somebody, and you may hate the actions that are going on. But let's do it out of love. Let's come with compassion, strong compassion, in a loving way, right? And then be willing to reflect on how the next time you could have done it better, or how you did it in a really good way that way. Let's approach things with that sense of love and compassion. And in that, it then allows us really to be able to gauge and feel, how we can do things in a good way and how we can do them better. And then finally, the fourth teaching, or the fourth step along this role of interconnected sacred movement, is after you've shown up and you're present in a good way, after you pay attention, to what your needs are and the needs of those around you, those situations, and after you then, stepped up and tried to do things in a compassionate with love, then the fourth step is to surrender. To surrender, to ask for help, to listen, to invite the ancestors to come in and help you and guide you, to surrender to those folks that have been sent in our life to help us learn, to teach us. And some of those are our own families, own family members that, man, just challenge the heck out of us. And to surrender that sometimes we don't know what to do. To surrender that sometimes we haven't done our best. We've made a mistake. We're doing things that are not helpful. To surrender to the sense of saying, Creator, ancestors, whoever, guide me, help me. My question is, who is your elder? Who are your elders? Who do you go to surrender, to ask for help, to get a reflection, to ask for a teaching? And sometimes, there are those people in our lives that we have. And then sometimes we need to choose. We need to choose who we call in to our space. When I do my prayers in the morning, including my grandparents, including my mom and dad, there's a number of elders that have crossed over, and I call their spirit in to help guide me. I call their spirit in to help, and not only in the morning when I'm going through life and going through the day, or I'm getting ready to go do a presentation or a teaching. Before I do that, I call them in. Please help me, And in order to do that, it really takes time, and it really takes a commitment, but that sense of surrendering. And many of you, like me, work very hard and work many, many hours. But if you think you can do it alone, you're fooling yourself. This society wants to make you an individual, wants you to pull yourself from your bootstraps. They give you accolades for you doing it, and you did the work, and you were the one that got the degree, and you were the one that got the riches, and you were the one that got the grant, and you were the one that made things successful. Well, let me just share something. It's never just us. It's always on the back of other people that have come before us. It's always because of the prayers somebody's sending. It's always because of, our ancestors' energy. And it's always, a sense of interconnectedness. So that surrendering, is also indicative of that. That you can do all the work, and it's, really appreciate the work that you do for so many people. But especially when it's time for the day to end, it is time to surrender. It is time to ask, Nana Luna, Grandmother Moon, and whoever your spirit guides are, whoever those spiritual teachers are, for you to put down all those things that you're worried about, that you're working on, that you're thinking about, and surrender them so that you can rest. So that you allow your mind, your body, your heart, and your spirit to rest in order that you can get ready for another day. And I know many of you think about things all through the night and, I got to do this. No. Turn that phone off. Things that you're thinking you need to plan the next day. I suggest put a tablet next to your bed and write those things out and then close that tablet. You'll pick them up in the morning when you start. But your body, your mind, and your spirit needs that surrendering time of peace, of rest, of relaxation. And you'll be amazed at how productive you can be if you allow that time for your body, your mind, and your spirit to rest. How more fulfilled you will be, how clear you will be about the things in your life. That fourth sense of surrendering is very important in how we interact in relationships. We don't always have to be right. And the question is, do you want a relationship or do you want to be right? Because sometimes that's the dilemma. We have, if you imagine yourself in that sacred circle, and whatever direction you're sitting on, always remember there's three other directions. And from your perception of the reality of your world, you may see it a certain way. And for you, it may be right to see it. Just remember there's three other directions that are just as right. And so be open to those other directions of the counsel from other people, the assistance. For some of us, we have difficulty accepting assistance, accepting help. You'll say, do you need any help? No, I'm good. But we need to be open to that assistance and to have people that we go to, that we surrender to help us heal. And that's really important for you to be able to not only put yourself in the situation, but also plan yourself for that situation. Create times of healing, times of tradition, times of rest, times of relaxation on the daily, not just once a year and Some of my friends, my good, strong friends that say they work 24/7, man, I work 24/7 for the people. They're so woke, they never sleep, I worry about them. Because you could see it in their body. You could see it in their spirit. You could see the way they carry themselves, always tense, always worried. Well, nature and ancestors says there's a time to rest and there's a time to release. And there's a time in which you need to go and get your own healing, to have someone else heal you. Go get a good massage, sit in the sauna, go to the sweat lodge, go by the beach, go by the water, go step in the water. Go for a walk and breathe. Get those wonderful herbs, the romero, the manzanilla, the rosemary, the different mint herbs, and allow those herbs to heal you. Surrender to the things that Creator has put in our lives to help us heal. And if you use these as a guide, showing up, being present, right? Paying attention, to yourself and your needs and the needs of those around you, the world around you, to approaching life with love, with compassion, the best way that you can, and then finally surrendering to the teachings, to your own needs, to your own counsel that is needed, to your own spiritual guidance. Then that gives you a map of how you can then move to a closer place of that Incloque-Nawake, interconnected sacred movement. As we close this circle today, I really want to thank you. Thank you all, just for the blessing of who you are. It's not coincidental that you're listening here, and I appreciate you. I want to ask you and invite you to reach out to us, share some reflections. What is it that's been helpful? Are there teachings that you'd like us to incorporate or cover? Are there people that that you think would be good for us to bring on here to have these dialogues and discussions? And let me just say that, I'm just one of the guides of these podcasts. We have the maestras, Maestra Susie, Maestra Deborah, that guide the one for mujeres, and I do amazing teachings in that one. And then you have Cisco that guides the one for the elders. And then, youngsters that, they're not so young anymore, they're getting older, but Ariel and AB and the other young people that they bring on, the guys, those for the youth, so listen to those too. But if you have some suggestions, let us know. Let us know that way. And share this with others. Share the podcast with others. Share, our connections, our links with others. But as we grow, we need to grow. We need to water what we want to grow. We want the healing and the sacredness to grow. So share this with others so you can get into a dialogue with them, so we can have an interconnected sacredness of people in this universe. There's a lot of really challenging things in the world right now. Some would say hateful, some would say hurtful. So we have to double down on the ones that are filled with love, filled with sacredness, filled with spiritual interconnection. And I invite you to do that. Thank you so much. And may you have a beautiful 2026. Let's stay connected. Let's stay joyful. Let's stay in love. And thank you very, very much. Incloque-Nawake. Thank you. Appreciate you. Ometeor.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.